A piercing wind howls through the Texas Panhandle, where a widow's courage and a boy's compassion defy the brutality of winter 1881. Sarah Hayes, hardened by loss, and her son Jacob stumble upon Tahan, a wounded Comanche leader, bleeding in the snow. Their choice to save him sparks a journey of redemption and defiance against a ruthless enemy. Will their act of mercy forge an unbreakable bond or unravel their fragile world? The answer lies in a tale of sacrifice and justice. Subscribe now, share where you're joining us from, and uncover how this unlikely alliance reshapes their lives. Can their hearts mend what hatred tore apart? The Texas Panhandle howled under a moonless sky, winter's claws tearing through the plains in 1881. Snow swirled like ash from a dying fire, driven by a wind that bit through Jacob Hayes' threadbare coat. The 10-year-old trudged across the frozen field, his boots crunching knee-deep drifts, arms clutching an empty burlap sack for firewood. Each step was a battle, his breath steaming in the bitter air, eyes stinging as ice crystals slashed his cheeks. The family's cabin, a squat shadow in the distance, flickered with the faint glow of a single lantern. Ma's signal to hurry. Firewood was life out here, and they were running low. Jacob's hands, numb and cracked, fumbled for brittle mesquite branches scattered by the storm. The wind screamed, a banshee wail that drowned out the world, until a sharp, panicked whinny cut through the gale. Jacob froze, heart pounding. Horses didn't scream like that unless death was close. Squinting through the blizzard, he spotted a dark shape slumped against a gnarled fence post, half buried in snow. Not an animal, a man. Blood stained the white ground beneath him, black as oil in the dim light. Jacob's breath hitched. He was no stranger to hardship, but this was something else. "Ma!" he shouted, voice swallowed by the storm. "Ma! Someone's dying!" Sarah Hayes burst from the cabin, her shawl flapping like a tattered flag. At 33, she carried the weight of a widow's life, lines etched deep around her eyes, hands rough from years of scraping by after her husband died in a silver mine collapse. She clutched a lantern, its weak light dancing across the snow as she stumbled toward Jacob. "What's wrong, boy?" Her voice was sharp, braced for trouble. Jacob pointed, trembling, to the crumpled figure. Sarah's gaze followed, and her face tightened. The man's massive frame, even prone, spoke of power. Broad shoulders under a hide coat, braids of black hair dusted with snow. Blood seeped from a wound in his side, soaking the ground. A Comanche, no doubt. The town called them enemies, savages to be driven out, or worse. Sarah's stomach churned. Helping him could bring a noose to their door. "Who is he, Ma?" Jacob's voice quavered, but his eyes were steady, fixed on the stranger. Sarah didn't answer. She knelt, snow soaking her skirt, and checked the man's pulse. Faint, but there. His hand clutched a leather pouch, fingers rigid as iron. Expensive boots, worn but well made, jutted from the drift. Boots no homesteader could afford. "He's alive," she muttered, more to herself than Jacob. But not for long out here. The wind howled, urging her to walk away, to let the storm claim its prize. But Jacob's small hand was already on the man's arm, tugging with all his might. "We gotta help him, Ma. We can't just leave him." Sarah's jaw clenched. She'd seen what happened to folks who crossed the invisible lines of this land, lines drawn by men like Silas Boone, who owned the mines and half the town. Helping a Comanche could mark her family as traitors. Yet Jacob's face, fierce with a child's stubborn mercy, stirred something deeper than fear. She thought of her late husband, his voice echoing. "Do what's right, Sarah, no matter the cost." "All right," she said, voice low. "Help me get him inside." They dragged the stranger through the snow, his weight like hauling a felled oak. Jacob grunted, his small frame straining, while Sarah bore the brunt, her arms burning. The man's blood left a scarlet trail stark against the white. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and boiled turnips. Clara, 8 years old and wide-eyed, peeked from behind a patched quilt. "Who's that, Ma?" she whispered, clutching her rag doll. "Hush, Clara," Sarah snapped, easing the man onto a straw pallet by the fire. His face, rugged and scarred, was gray with pain, lips moving faintly. Words in a tongue Sarah didn't know. Comanche, maybe, mixed with broken English. "My son, the land, stolen." Sarah peeled back his coat, revealing a bullet wound, ragged and deep. Not fatal if cleaned, but infection was a slow killer out here. She fetched a tin of water and her husband's old shirt for bandages, working fast as the firelight cast shadows on the walls. Jacob knelt close, eyes locked on the stranger. "Why's he bleeding so much?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Sarah didn't look up. "Bullet. Someone wanted him dead." She glanced at the man's pouch, still gripped tight. Whatever was inside meant more to him than his own life. Outside, the blizzard raged, rattling the cabin's loose boards. Sarah's hands moved with practiced calm, but her mind raced. This man, Tahan, she'd later learn, was no ordinary drifter. His presence was a spark in a tinderbox, and her family was caught in the middle. Jacob's small hand brushed hers, steady despite the cold. "We did right, didn't we, Ma?" he asked. Sarah paused, meeting his gaze. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one coming. "Yeah, Jacob," she said, voice rough. "We did." The fire in the Hayes cabin snapped, casting jagged shadows across the walls as Sarah worked by its glow. Tahan lay on the straw pallet, his massive frame still, save for the shallow rise of his chest. The bullet wound, now cleaned and bound with strips of her late husband's shirt, seeped less, but fever clung to him like damp rot. Outside, the Texas Panhandle blizzard roared on, sealing the family in with their dangerous guest. Sarah's hands, calloused from years of toil, moved with grim precision, boiling water, tearing more cloth, checking his pulse. Jacob sat cross-legged nearby, his 10-year-old eyes fixed on Tahan's scarred face, while Clara huddled by the hearth, clutching her doll like a shield against the unknown. Tahan's lips twitched, spilling words that sounded like a chant, guttural and strange, woven with broken English. "My son, Kotsoteca, gone. The land, taken." His voice rasped like dry leather, each syllable heavy with pain. Sarah paused, her rag dripping over the tin basin. The names meant nothing to her, but the grief in them cut deep, stirring memories of her own loss, her husband's broken body pulled from the silver mine's rubble. She shook her head, focusing on the task. This wasn't her fight. Not yet. Jacob leaned closer, his breath fogging in the chilly air. "What's he saying, Ma? Who's Kotsoteca?" Sarah's lips tightened. "His boy, I reckon." "Hush now. Let him rest." But Tahan's mutterings grew sharper, a fevered litany of betrayal. Boone, the snake, stole the plains. Sarah's hands froze. Silas Boone. The name was a splinter in her mind, the man whose mining empire had crushed her husband under cost-cutting greed. Could Tahan's fight be tied to the same shadow that haunted her family? She pushed the thought down, but it lingered like smoke. Clara's small voice broke the silence. "Is he gonna die, Ma?" Her eyes, wide as a fawn's, darted to Tahan. Sarah glanced at her daughter, then back to the Comanche leader. His braids, streaked with gray, splayed across the pallet, and his hand still gripped that leather pouch, knuckles white as bone. "Not if I can help it," Sarah said, more to herself than Clara. She soaked the rag again, pressing it to Tahan's brow. His skin burned under her touch, but his eyes flickered open for a moment. Dark, deep as a canyon, holding a story she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. By dawn, the storm's howl had dulled to a low moan, but the cabin felt like a trap. Sarah hadn't slept, her mind wrestling with the risk they'd taken. The town would brand her a traitor for sheltering a Comanche, and Boone's men were never far off, sniffing for weakness. She checked Tahan's wound again, the bandage stained but holding. He stirred, muttering, "The river. Sacred. They burned it." Jacob, now stoking the fire, turned sharply. "What river, Ma? Why's he talking about burnin'?" Sarah didn't answer. The pouch caught her eye again, its worn leather etched with symbols she couldn't read. Curiosity tugged, but she let it lie. Some secrets weren't hers to touch. As the day dragged on, Tahan's fever held tight. Sarah boiled the last of their dried sage for a poultice, its sharp scent filling the cabin. Jacob hovered, asking questions she couldn't answer. Why'd someone shoot him? Was it Boone's men? His voice was eager, too young to grasp the danger. Sarah's patience frayed. "Enough, Jacob. Tend the fire." But the boy's words gnawed at her. Boone's shadow loomed larger now, tying Tahan's pain to her own. She remembered the mine's collapse, the whispers of corners cut to save coin, and Boone's cold smile at the inquest, untouchable as ever. Night fell, the cabin's single window rattling under the wind's dying breath. Tahan's voice grew clearer, though weak. "Kotsoteka, my son, killed for the land." Sarah's heart sank. She knew loss, but this was a wound carved by more than accident, a deliberate theft of home and blood. She met Tahan's gaze, now half open, and saw not just pain, but defiance. "Who did it?" she asked, voice low. Tahan's eyes narrowed, searching her face. "Boone, his machines, his guns. Drive us out." The words landed like a stone in her gut. Boone wasn't just her enemy, he was Tahan's too. Jacob, listening from the shadows, crept closer. "Ma, if Boone hurt him, why are we hiding him? Shouldn't we tell someone?" Sarah's hand stilled on the bandage. "Tell who? The marshal in Boone's pocket? The townsfolk itching to hang a Comanche?" "We don't hide him," she said, voice hard. "We save him. That's what your pa would have done." But doubt gnawed at her. Saving Tahan wasn't just mercy. It was defiance, a spark that could burn their fragile life to ash. Clara, quiet till now, whispered, "What if Boone comes?" Sarah didn't answer. The fire cracked, and Tahan's hand tightened on his pouch, as if guarding a truth too heavy to share. The cabin's walls seemed to close in, the air thick with unspoken questions. Sarah looked at her children, their faces lit by firelight. Jacob's fierce curiosity, Clara's quiet fear. Tahan's presence was a blade, cutting open old wounds and new risks. She didn't know his full story, but she knew Boone's. And now, with a wounded warrior under her roof, their fates were tangled tighter than a hangman's knot. The storm outside might be fading, but a bigger one was brewing, and Sarah felt its weight settling in her bones. The weight of Tahan's words hung in the air, binding Sarah's fate to his, like barbed wire. Dawn broke over the Texas panhandle, the blizzard's roar now a sullen mutter, but the cabin felt no safer. Sarah stood at the window, her breath fogging the cracked glass, watching the snow-drifted plains for trouble she knew was coming. Tahan's fever had eased, his eyes sharper now, tracking her movements with a warrior's instinct. Jacob and Clara slept fitfully by the fire, their small forms curled under patched quilts, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the weather. A distant hoofbeat snapped Sarah's head up. She grabbed her husband's old rifle, its stock worn smooth by years of use, and stepped onto the porch. Dust and snow swirled as a lone rider approached, his silhouette sharp against the gray horizon. Silas Boone. His tailored coat and wide-brimmed hat marked him as a man who owned more than land. He owned fear. Sarah's grip tightened, her knuckles white. Boone reined his horse to a stop, his cold eyes sweeping the cabin like a vulture sizing up carrion. "Mornin', Widow Hayes," he called, voice smooth as snake oil. "Heard you're keepin' dangerous company." Sarah's jaw set. "Ain't your business who's under my roof, Boone." Her voice carried the edge of a woman who'd buried her husband and her trust in men like him. Boone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, it's my business when you're harboring a Comanche killer. Folks in town don't take kindly to that." He leaned forward, his horse snorting steam. "Hand him over, Sarah, or I'll have the marshal seize this land for aiding an enemy." The threat landed like a stone in her gut, but she didn't flinch. "You don't scare me, Silas. This is my home." Inside, Tahan stirred, his hand still clutching the leather pouch. He'd heard every word, his face hard as flint, despite the pain etching his features. Jacob woke, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and crept to the door. "Ma, is that him? The man who hurt Pa?" Sarah's glance silenced him, but Boone caught the boy's words, his smile curling sharper. "Your boy's got a good memory. Shame he's tangled up in your bad choices." Sarah stepped forward, rifle raised just enough to make her point. "Get off my land, Boone. You got no claim here." Boone's gaze lingered, calculating. "You've got till sundown tomorrow to hand over that savage, or I'll bring men to take him myself, and your land with him." He tipped his hat, a mockery of courtesy, and wheeled his horse away, leaving hoofprints in the snow like a promise of ruin. Sarah stood frozen, the rifle heavy in her hands, until Jacob's small voice broke through. "Ma, what's he gonna do?" She didn't answer, her mind racing. Boone wasn't bluffing. He'd burned out homesteaders before, cloaking his greed in law. Back inside, Tahan sat up, wincing as he tested his wound. "You should have let me die in the snow," he said, voice low and rough. "I bring you death now." Sarah met his gaze, her own eyes burning. "I don't save men to watch 'em die later. You're here, so you fight with us." Tahan's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but respect flickered in his eyes. Clara, now awake, clutched her doll tighter. "Ma, why's he so mad at us?" Sarah knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Some men want everything, Clara. They don't care who they crush." The day passed in tense quiet, the cabin a fortress under siege. Sarah mended a torn blanket, her needle stabbing with more force than needed, while Jacob sharpened a hatchet, his boyish hands clumsy but determined. Tahan spoke little, but his presence filled the room, his silence louder than words. He carved a small wooden figure with a knife from his pouch, a horse with intricate lines, and handed it to Clara. "For courage," he said. Her shy smile was the first warmth in hours. As dusk painted the sky blood red, Sarah stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon. Boone's threat wasn't just about Tahan. It was about breaking her, claiming her land for his empire. She thought of her husband, his dreams buried in that mine, and her resolve hardened. If you're out there listening to this tale, hit that subscribe button and share where you're hearing it from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Stories of folks fighting for what's right against men like Boone. She wouldn't let him win, not while she had breath left. Tahan joined her on the porch, his shadow long and lean. "Your heart is strong, Sarah Hayes," he said, voice steady despite his pain. "But Boone's men are many." She nodded, the rifle cold against her shoulder. "Then we make a stand. For my kids. For your land." The wind carried their words away, but the pact was sealed. Tomorrow, Boone would come, and the plains would run red again. Sarah glanced at Tahan, his eyes fixed on the darkening sky, and knew this fight was no longer just hers. The Texas Panhandle held its breath under a sky bruised purple, the air thick with the promise of violence. Sarah stood on her porch, rifle cradled like an old friend, her eyes locked on the horizon where Boone's men would come. Tahan's words from the night before, "Boone's men are many," echoed in her mind, but surrender wasn't in her blood. Inside, Jacob sharpened a kitchen knife, his small hand steady despite the fear in his eyes, while Clara clutched the wooden horse Tahan had carved, whispering to it as if it could ward off the dark. The cabin's walls creaked, a brittle shield against what was coming. Hoofbeats rumbled, faint at first, then a growing thunder. Sarah's heart thudded, but her hands were rock steady. Shadows moved in the dusk, 6 riders, their silhouettes jagged with rifles and hate. Boone led them, his coat flapping like a vulture's wings, his face a mask of cold triumph. "Time's up, Widow Hayes," he called, voice cutting through the chill. "Hand over the Comanche, or we burn this place to ash." Sarah stepped forward, the porch boards groaning under her boots. "You'll have to kill me first, Silas." Tahan emerged from the cabin, his wound still raw, but his stance unyielding. His braid swung as he moved, eyes glinting like obsidian in the fading light. "I am Tahan," he said, voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of a man who'd faced death and walked away. "You want me?" "Boone, come take me." His hand rested on the knife at his belt, the same one that carved Clara's horse, now a promise of blood. Boone laughed, sharp and cruel. Brave words for a dead man. Jacob slipped beside Sarah, the knife in his hand trembling but held high. "Stay back, Ma," he whispered, his voice cracking with a boy's courage. Clara peeked from the doorway, her sobs muffled as she hugged the wooden horse. Sarah's rifle snapped to her shoulder, the barrel aimed at Boone's chest. "One step closer, and you're the first to fall," she said, her words hard as flint. The riders hesitated, their horses snorting, sensing the tension coiled like a rattler. The standoff broke with a shout. One of Boone's men, a wiry thug with a scar across his cheek, spurred his horse forward, raising his rifle. Tahan moved faster, his knife flashing as he tackled the man from the saddle. They hit the snow hard, a tangle of fists and steel. Sarah's rifle cracked, the shot grazing another rider's arm, sending him reeling. Boone cursed, drawing his pistol, but Sarah's next shot kicked dirt at his horse's hooves, forcing it to rear. "Stay put, Silas," she barked. Jacob darted forward, swinging his knife at a rider's leg, drawing a howl of pain. The boy's bravery stunned Sarah, but fear clawed her gut. Her son was in the fray. Tahan wrestled his opponent down, blood staining the snow, his wound tearing open, but his strength unbroken. He shouted in Comanche, a guttural war cry that sent a shiver through the riders. 2 broke ranks, spurring their horses into the dark, but Boone rallied the rest. "Kill 'em all!" he roared, firing wildly. Sarah reloaded, her hands slick with sweat, as bullets splintered the porch rail. Tahan grabbed a fallen rifle, firing with deadly precision, dropping another of Boone's men. The snow churned red, the air thick with gunpowder and screams. Clara's cries pierced the chaos, and Sarah yelled, "Get to the cellar, Clara!" The girl scrambled inside, her small form disappearing as Sarah fired again, her shot grazing Boone's shoulder. He snarled, clutching the wound, but didn't fall. Then, a new sound. Hooves, heavy and fast. The territorial marshal, Henderson, rode in with 2 deputies, their badges glinting in the torchlight. "Drop your weapons," Henderson shouted, his revolver trained on Boone. The fight froze, Boone's men faltering as the law closed in. Sarah lowered her rifle, breath ragged, while Tahan stood tall, blood dripping from his reopened wound. Boone's face twisted with rage. "This ain't over, Hayes," he spat, but Henderson's men were already cuffing him. "Silas Boone, you're under arrest," Henderson said, his voice calm but iron-hard. "Fraud, murder, and land theft. Mrs. Hayes's papers, and this man's testimony," he nodded at Tahan, "gave us enough." Sarah's chest heaved, the rifle still warm in her hands. She'd slipped the marshal her husband's old mining contracts, proof of Boone's corruption, when he'd passed through days ago. Tahan's steady gaze met hers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared fight. The riders scattered, leaving Boone in chains. Sarah sank to her knees, Jacob rushing to her side. "We did it, Ma," he whispered, his knife still clutched tight. Tahan swayed, his strength spent, but his eyes burned with something new. Hope, maybe, or redemption. The night settled, the plains quiet but for the wind's low moan, carrying away the echoes of battle. The Texas Panhandle exhaled as the last echoes of battle faded, the night's bloodshed swallowed by a dawn that broke, clean and sharp. Sarah stood in the cabin's doorway, her hands still raw from the rifle's recoil, watching the plains shimmer under a tentative sun. Boone was gone, hauled off in chains, but the weight of survival lingered like dust after a stampede. Tahan, bloodied but unbowed, had collapsed by the fire, his wound freshly bandaged. Jacob and Clara, shaken but safe, clung to her, their eyes wide with a new understanding of the world's cruelty and their mother's strength. Spring crept into the Panhandle, melting snow into rivulets that carved paths through the red earth. Tahan stayed, his strength returning like the green sprouting across the plains. He worked alongside Sarah, his broad hands, once clumsy with a hammer, now steady as they rebuilt the porch Boone's men had splintered. Jacob trailed him like a shadow, soaking up lessons not found in books. "Hold the nail straight, boy," Tahan said, his voice low but patient, guiding Jacob's small hands. "Let the hammer sing its own song." The boy's grin was brighter than the April sun, his knife, still stained from the fight, tucked proudly in his belt. Clara, quieter now, followed Tahan too, her wooden horse always close. One morning, he knelt beside her, pointing to the horizon, where hawks wheeled against a cloudless sky. "Listen to the wind," he said, his braids swaying. "It carries the voices of those who came before." Clara tilted her head, clutching the horse. "Does it talk about Pa?" Tahan's eyes softened, a rare crack in his warrior's mask. "It speaks of all who fought for their own. Your father's there." Sarah, mending a fence nearby, paused, her throat tight. She hadn't expected Tahan's words to cut so deep, stitching her grief into something bearable. The cabin transformed under Tahan's hands. He fixed the sagging roof, carved new pegs for the walls, and taught Jacob to track deer through the mesquite groves. One evening, by the creek, he showed the boy how to read hoofprints in the mud. "See the depth," he said, pointing. "A buck, heavy, moving fast. You feel the land? It tells you the truth." Jacob's eyes gleamed, clutching the Comanche knife Tahan had gifted him, its handle etched with symbols of a people nearly erased. Sarah watched from a distance, her heart torn between gratitude and unease. Tahan was no replacement for her husband, but his presence filled a void she hadn't named. The town buzzed with Boone's downfall, whispers of his trial drifting like tumbleweeds. Sarah's mining contracts, paired with Tahan's testimony of land theft, had cracked Boone's empire. Neighbors, once wary, now tipped their hats when Sarah rode into town, her wagon laden with spring vegetables. But she saw the glances at Tahan, the muttered words, savage, trouble, and knew trust was a fragile thing. One night, as the fire crackled, Tahan spoke of his people, the Kotsoteca, driven from their sacred river by Boone's greed. "I fought to keep our bones in the earth," he said, his voice like gravel. "But I lost more than land." Sarah met his gaze, seeing her own loss mirrored. "We both lost," she said, "but we're still here." Weeks passed, and Tahan's strength returned, his wound now a puckered scar. He stood taller, his eyes scanning the plains, as if expecting ghosts. One dawn, he packed his pouch, the leather worn but heavy with meaning. "I must go," he told Sarah, his voice steady. "My people need me." Jacob, overhearing, clutched the Comanche knife, his face crumpling. "You're leaving us?" Tahan knelt, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're strong now, Jacob. Keep the knife, it's yours to carry." To Clara he gave a nod, her wooden horse a silent bond. Sarah's chest ached, but she nodded too. "You gave us more than we gave you," she said, her voice rough. As Tahan mounted his horse, the plains glowed gold, wildflowers breaking through the earth. Sarah stood with her children, the cabin behind them stronger than it had been in years. Jacob's hand tightened on the knife, his eyes bright with a new fire. Hope, not just survival. Tahan raised a hand, then rode west, his silhouette fading into the sunrise. Sarah watched, her heart steady for the first time since the mine took her husband. They'd saved a man, but he'd saved them too, weaving their broken threads into a family forged by choice, not blood. The wind whispered across the panhandle, carrying the promise of a new season. The tale of Sarah, Jacob, Clara, and Tahan weaves a rugged thread of courage and redemption through the Texas Panhandle's harsh plains. Their fight against Boone's greed and their unlikely bond remind us that mercy can forge family from loss. What did their story stir in you? Share your thoughts below. Where are you listening from, and what moved you most? Your voices keep these tales alive. I'm grateful for your time and heart in joining this journey. Until we meet again by the next campfire, stay strong and keep listening for the whispers of the wind.